Let's talk about oscillators for a moment. Now, an oscillator is just something that can oscillate. And lots of things can oscillate. In fact, nearly everything we meet can oscillate if organized correctly. Here are just 3 things I found that people had left around my room. And if I tap them, you can hear that they make quite clear, distinct sounds. And that clear single frequency that they're giving off is low in that case and high in that case. And it's wearing off after a while. And the fact that it's wearing off means it's losing energy to its environment, and that's called damping. And so this thing here gives off some sound, and then it's lost its oscillation, and so it's damped. If I have the desk is highly damped, and it has a very broad spectrum of frequencies. So that didn't sound like it had a very clear frequency at all. But it had a very broad spectrum, and it was very strongly damped. Alternatively, you might have something like a tuning fork. A tuning fork is very specifically designed to have low damping so that it keeps its note for a long time. So it has a beautifully clear frequency, which it's designed to have, and it also has very little damping to its environment. And so you can use that to check the notes of other things. And you also have other kinds of oscillations like a pendulum, which can oscillate for a while, and it'll eventually get damped as well. In this case, largely because it's losing energy because I'm not holding it too well with my arm, and so it's losing energy to my arm. Now, it's no accident that the things that we saw were very highly damped tended to have less clear frequencies. So the clearer, better frequency you could hear, the less damped it was. And that's easy to understand if you look at the wave for a very clear frequency. Remember, as we go along in time, a very clear frequency looks like a sine wave. And if you have something that's really highly damped, then it doesn't look like a sine wave. And it's certainly not obvious, but you can make any kind of waveform out of a bunch of sine waves. We need lots of different frequency sine waves in order to make something that looks damped compared to something that looks exactly like a single frequency, like a single sine wave. So for some purposes, you definitely want to build something with very low damping so that you get a lovely, long, pure sound. And this tuning fork, because it's got low damping, lets us have a nice frequency with which we can set other frequencies. But sometimes you want to build something very deliberately with high damping, and that's because the coupling of energy between an oscillator and the environment can go both ways. For example, take a swing. So if you've got a swing, if you push this at one frequency, that's not the correct frequency for the swing. So its natural oscillation frequency might be particularly slower than this, and it doesn't matter if I push it really quite hard if I'm pushing it at the wrong frequency. But if I look, okay, that's the frequency it has naturally, and if I tap it with that frequency, I can get very big oscillations very fast. So I couple energy from my environment to an oscillator much, much better at the particular natural frequency of that oscillator. And that phenomenon is called resonance. And that frequency is the resonant frequency. So why is it important to build some things that are highly damped? Well, it's not always true that you want things to oscillate. In the 1940s, on a particular windy day, there was a suspension bridge at Tacoma Narrows that was really, unfortunately, driven rather hard by the wind. Now, the wind wasn't pulsing, so it wasn't like a child being pushed on a swing, but the wind was pushing, and the oscillation of the bridge wasn't sufficiently damped. What that meant was that the oscillations just kept on getting bigger and bigger as they were being pushed by the wind. You can see there's a car on that bridge, and there's also a person in there, and that person was trying to get to his car because his dog, or indeed his daughter's dog, was in that car. Eventually he had to give up and go away because that bridge did not survive that oscillation, and he only just made it free himself. And you can see that the bridge went down. This is a famous example of resonance. It doesn't just hold to things like bridges, and whenever you're building a skyscraper, it's really important that you make it so that it doesn't have one good frequency that it likes to oscillate at. When you're building a skyscraper, there's a natural tendency to make every floor the same and to make them out of the same materials in the same way. And that does, in fact, tend to lead to very clear resonance frequencies for your skyscraper. And that's bad. So engineers have to very deliberately mix up how they build the interior structures of skyscrapers when they're going higher and higher. So how damped an oscillator is called its quality factor. If you have a really high quality factor oscillator, then it tends to have a really low amount of damping and will oscillate really hard. Sometimes you want a really high quality factor. Sometimes when you're building buildings, you want a very low quality factor. And sometimes you want something in between. If I had a guitar and I made a lovely pure sound, but it wasn't damped to the environment, then you'd never hear it. It wouldn't be emitting very much sound. So the fact that there's sound coming off it is how we get our actual music. And yet if it was a very low quality factor, it'd be more like plucking a bench and you wouldn't get a lovely sound. And finally, if I place my finger on this fret here, then actually this note here and this string here are basically the same frequency. And that means that the waves coming off this string, the sound waves, must be the right frequency to try and excite the second one. I'll see if I can zoom in really close there, and I'll show if I pluck one string, both of them actually vibrate.